And it probably heard me say that, so I'm going to list now for the future, for the death lists of AI. Oh, man. All right. Yeah, it's 4 o'clock. Okay, we'll just go through it. So, let's see here. You guys finished book 1 out? I also want to kind of revisit. Oh, first of all, I always forget to announce this. There's no philosophy club tonight because of Valentine's Day. So it's either a time for you to celebrate, forcefully celebrate your love with your partner because society told you to, or be, just be sad. Either way. You can do both. Ooh, that's an eye opener. If Valentine's Day with your partner makes you sad, how often does that happen? Probably a lot. Right? I mean, because if you think about it, Valentine's Day is the day where you're supposed to do something big. So like expectations are like way the fuck up here. And so like it's almost like you can't ever live up to those expectations. So it's always going to end in disappointment.
I have a way of setting really low expectations.
Good for you. Right? That's how you shit. That's very smart.
Well, also, just like from a mathematical perspective, if like I would assume for most people that their like relationship that results in like long-term marriage or commitment or something like that is like typically not for people their first one. So even if we make the average that it's like 2, that means like 50% of the couples out there is like not going towards something super long-term.
Yes, I agree.
Nice now.
Yeah, well, I mean, I always...
Probably higher than that, though.
Yeah, I mean, I always found it interesting. I don't know if I mentioned this to this class. I know you probably heard me say this before, but I always found it really interesting that people will say things, did I say this class, where people say, like, their relationship was a waste of time, right? Like if they break up, they're like, well, that was a waste of time, or they look back on it like it was a complete waste of time, which is such a bizarre way to look at human relationships. I mean, you're basically effectively saying that if one of you doesn't die first, it was a waste.
It's like picking a show.
Oh, what?
It's like picking a show. You gotta pick one that you actually want to watch.
Like a TV show?
Yeah.
Did you just relate long-term romantic relationships to television?
Absolutely, yes.
That's awesome. Good for you.
No, but I love seeing, well, I don't love, but it's a little funny to see the tweets after Valentine's Day of like teddy bears and balloons and stuff like in the street or the trash can. You're like, I wonder what happened.
Does that happen often?
Yeah.
Wow, social media is vicious. Holy shit. But yeah, I mean, even if something goes horribly wrong and you throw away the teddy bear, you learn something, right? And even if you don't learn something, you liked it when you were in it, right? I hope. And if you didn't like it when you were in it, well, then you learned something. So, like, to focus on the negative, always, I mean, I know it's hard to not do that, but it always strikes me as, like, just the wrong attitude to have. Like, there's reasons you were with that person when you were with that person. And so, like, looking at it in a positive light will just make you a happier person, I find. Yeah. That's my love advice for everybody. Pamela would be laughing right now, so.
I was gonna say, like, we've been talking about Heidegger and existentialism, and that, like, you can even take a negative attitude, but you can't say that, like, you weren't living in that scenario.
Exactly.
Because you're always living.
Right, you were always in it at the moment, and so we tend to, like, have revisionist history a lot, too, right? Like, it affects, so a negative thing will happen, then it affects the way that we look back on the things before that negative event. It's almost impossible to not do that, but, like, try not to, right? Appreciate the good times and then move on. That's what I think. All right. So someone said something last time that they were surprised how easy Plato is to read, and I agree entirely with that. Right. So like most of the philosophy that you read, I would imagine, is just difficult to read on first glance. Right. Like, has anyone ever taken Dr. Wallace's classes before? Do you guys read Foucault?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I took a grad class on Foucault and on his History of Madness, not the little one, I mean the full one, the big one, his original one. That's like 400, 500 pages. And at the end of the class, I was like, I don't know what to write about. So my professor said, why don't you write a summary of the whole book, chapter by chapter. So it's like, ends up being like 80 pages long. And at the end of it, I think I understood what he was talking about, but I mean, that's really difficult reading, where like you read a page and you're like, I know all of those words, and I don't know what he said. Whereas Plato is writing in a very straightforward way. So if anyone didn't read yet, you really should, because you can just sit and read it. just for the sake of reading it. And it's actually like a joy to read. It's really kind of fun. But he's also talking about things that are really, really, really deep while doing that. And that's the sort of the beauty of Plato. I don't know if any of you guys know, do you guys know who Dr. Curtis is?
Mhm.
All right, so Dr. Curtis in Ireland is teaching a class this summer on an Irish playwright, poet, novelist named Brendan Behan.
That's a good class.
That's right. And Behan writes in a very, very common tongue kind of way, right? He's writing the way in which people who were in Irish prisons would speak, right? And so you could just read it, but there's so much going into the language that's underneath those words about sort of the political, like, times that they were going through and just psychology of these people, that just because something is written simply does not mean that it's not valuable philosophically. And on the flip side of that, just because something is complicated doesn't mean it's actually saying something, right? I actually was, another class I was taking on Deleuze, and at the end of that class, I said to my professor, same professor, I was like, I have literally no idea, is this guy, I'm either not smart enough to understand this or he's being confusing on purpose. And she said, it's the latter. I was like, why would he be confusing on purpose? And it's because it was elitism, right? It's like you have to struggle to understand what I'm talking about, even though you could explain it in significantly easier terms if you wanted to. I hate that. I think that's complete and utter bullshit. Don't make philosophy something that has gates that are kept. And that's why I love Plato, because he doesn't write that way. He writes in a way that anyone can just read it and get something out of it. And if you want to spend the time and the effort to really dig in, you can mine so much amazing things from reading it. But again, you can read it as a freshman and get what's going on. Yeah.
Is that like readability true of like every translation, or was that something that was done by translators to make it easier?
Oh no, it's every single translation.
Okay.
Yeah. So, like even the Greek, I could read Plato in Greek when I was like really doing Greek a lot. Like I could read Plato in Greek.
Okay.
Aristotle was a nightmare. Like seriously, like reading Aristotle in Greek is like, hoy. The Plato I could just read.
Okay.
I can't really do that anymore because you have to keep it up, but I could, and probably could if I tried, but.
Are there usually a lot of issues with like multiple translations to certain words or anything like that?
Yeah, so there's a lot of stuff that gets translated different. There's certain Greek words that don't translate. They literally don't.
Oh.
So like the most obvious one is the word eudaimonia, which if you've never taken my intro, so the Greek word here, right? So this word, EU, is a prefix that means good. So like euthanasia, right? It means, so thanatos means death, EU, euthanize, which means a good death, right? So we're euthanizing our pets, we're giving them a death with dignity. This is killing me. So eudaimonia literally translates to, so a daimon just means like a spirit, right? So when we say that someone has achieved the best possible life, that they truly have lived a life worthy of admiration, not only from that they should be proud of, but from an outside perspective, we say that that person has achieved eudaimonia, and it almost always gets translated to happiness. Like that person is truly happy. But that's really not what that word means, because happiness is like a feeling, right? It's fleeting. Whereas eudaimonia is something like you have literally, you're flourishing, right? So it gets translated as happiness, flourishing. If you were to translate it literally, it would mean of good spirits, right? But that's misleading too, because that's not quite what it means.
Just think they're happy.
The reason why that word is this is because it's as if you had like a guardian angel that has blessed your life in such a way that everything just kind of goes right. Because eudaimonia is not just did you live a good life, it's did you live a good life, and were those were those things that you couldn't accomplish on your own just provided for you? Like, were you lucky enough to have good friends? Were you lucky enough to be born in the right family? Were you lucky enough to be attractive? Were you lucky enough to be born into money? Like, these are the things that also factor in.
Did that term exist before Aristotle?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Mhm.
Okay.
So yeah. Where'd my pencil go? There it is. All right. So diving into Plato. Someone tell me where we left off.
Like page
Yeah. So 336, 337-ish, right? Lysimachus is joining the fray. We've had Cephalus describe justice, and he left. We had Polemarchus give his definition, helping your friends, harming your enemies, and we show how Socrates sort of it's like a cat with a mouse, just sort of very easily handles that and dismisses it. And then Thrasymachus comes charging in, and they describe him coming charging in like he's overcome with emotion, right? Like a bull, just filled with like aggression and rage, and they had to hold him back earlier. What significance do you guys think that plays? Why not have Thrasymachus just be cool-headed? Because sometimes when Plato has sophists being presented in his dialogues, represented in his dialogues, they're calm as can be, right? Like when he's talking to Gorgias about whether or not it's better to suffer injustice or to commit it, they're at Gorgias' house, they're just having a chat. So why have Thrasymachus be so angry about it? Yeah?
Is Plato trying to show that he's like losing the argument? Like,
Who? Socrates or Thrasymachus?
this,
Yeah.
yeah.
Almost no one can pronounce it, it's okay. So Thrasymachus, so he's coming in angry, emotional, whereas Socrates is cool as can be. And so it could be, right, that he's trying to show like this sort of juxtaposition between someone who's like doing philosophy properly, right, engaging in honest dialogue, which is interesting, and when you see what happens immediately after this, versus someone who I said last time, who's coming in with this sort of heuristic attitude, right? So, as I said before, for Plato, anyone who comes into an argument angry and looking for blood, right? They're not actually genuinely concerned with the truth of what's going on. They're just looking for a way to tear down the other person, right? And notice, Thrasymachus does that right away. So Socrates, he kind of pushes Socrates to give his definition of justice. Socrates is like, well, I never said I knew it. And Thrasymachus calls him out. He's like, there you go, pretending like you don't know, and really it's a trick. That's an ad hominem, right? He's literally attacking Socrates' character before we even get started. And Thrasymachus was the one who said he's going to come in and start arguing things, right? So it's almost like Plato is painting a picture of like what not to do. And yet, despite being angry, Thrasymachus is actually really good at this, right? He gives a really, really good definition. And Socrates starts off, so one of you guys something that I think is really amazing. They describe him as a pancratiast, which is essentially, I don't know if you guys looked it up, but it's essentially like what we would probably say, like be like a UFC fighter of sorts, right? So this is someone who wrestles and boxes at the same time, right? So it's a different sport altogether. So these people are considered like fighters, brawlers. And so Socrates says, are you suggesting when you say that justice is made of the stronger, do you mean stronger like this kind of person, right? Like someone who's like a brawler, who eats beef to get strong, is that what you mean? And what's Thrasymachus' take on Socrates' assessment of his initial definition?
He has a runny nose.
So
That's later on.
You are disgusting, Socrates. You take hold of the argument in any way you can to work it to most harm.
Exactly. He's basically saying to Socrates, first of all, that's a straw man. You know that's not what I meant. And notice, Socrates did do this. Right? So why would Plato write Socrates in a light that he's seemingly on purpose manipulating the argument? Right? This matters. Right? Socrates could be just he's trying to make him human. It could be he's trying to show a side of Socrates that people criticize all the time. Right? Yeah.
Or maybe it's kind of like treat the light, how Thrasymachus is kind of coming arrogant, hot-headed, tearing the other person down, so Socrates comes at him with the same sort of methodology.
Right, so matching like with like?
Yeah, giving him his own medicine kind of in a way.
Could be, right? Setting him off guard, yeah.
I would probably see it as like, I don't know if the depiction of Socrates here is supposed to be negative on Socrates' light, because I think it's more about Thrasymachus, and that like someone is trying to understand his argument, but the moment that they give their first summary of like trying to understand, he's like, you're gross. He doesn't even give him space.
Right, and notice how you're right. It could be completely sort of the opposite of how Socrates does it, right? So when someone gives like a pretty bad assessment of something or a bad definition, Socrates doesn't go, oh God, that's so stupid, right? He doesn't do that at all. Socrates is always kind of like, well, I mean, maybe we should think about that more, right? But Thrasymachus, the sophist, someone says something and tears him down, right? It's almost like he's trying to shut things down. He's trying to dominate as opposed to trying to actually get somewhere, to try to get to some kind of truth. So we have a straw man there. And then Socrates asks him to sort of explain. And so we'll just read this here. He said, just say more clearly what I mean. He said, don't you know, so this is 338D, that some cities are ruled tyrannically, some democratically, some aristocratically. Of course, and each city isn't the ruling group the master, certainly. And each ruling group sets down laws for its own advantage. A democracy sets down democratic laws, tyranny, tyrannic laws, and others do the same. And they declare that what they have set down, their own advantage, is just for the ruled. And the man who departs from it they punish as a breaker of the law and a doer of unjust deeds. This, best of men, is what I mean. In every city, the same thing is just, the advantage of the established ruling body. It surely is master. So the man who reasons rightly concludes that everywhere justice is the same thing, the advantage of the stronger. So, in effect, what he's saying at this point, right, is any city that we have, any state that we have, whatever we're going to call just is simply decided by those that are in power. They make laws, they make rules to keep themselves in power. And so when people follow these laws, we are not really helping ourselves, as he's come to say. We're just helping those that are in power stay in power. Do you think this is right? Yeah.
I don't know if it's right or not, but I think what's interesting about Thrasymachus is that like the previous people have been giving like an analytic definition, but he's giving more of like a almost like empirical definition. It's like he's not trying to say what justice is, and he's just saying like how it works or like where you see it.
Yeah. No, and I think actually it might be something I want to rephrase that a bit. So he's actually saying, from his perspective, he's like, this is what justice is.
Mm.
You guys are trying to have this like idealized form, and yeah, maybe that's fine. We can say like justice ideally should. You're making these normative claims.
Yeah.
And that's all good and fine. I'm telling you like the truth. Like if we're being honest about it, justice is a sham. And it's just a way to keep people in power. I'm just telling you, it's like descriptive, right? So when we say empirical, it's like I'm looking at all these city-states, and every single one of them, it's basically the same. Whoever's in power, doesn't matter if it's democracy, tyranny, or somewhere in between, all of it, the laws are made to keep the people in power. Yep.
Does Nietzsche ever talk about Thrasymachus?
A lot.
Okay. I read Nietzsche a lot. But
Thrasymachus and Callicles are like, Nietzsche's like, the reason you should read Plato is because Thrasymachus and Callicles had it right. He also likes Adeimantus too, which we'll get to in book 2 here. Did you have something? Nope? Okay. So this is where it gets interesting. Socrates then pushes back here, right? And he says, where is it? So it's just the rulers. There we go. So go a little bit further down, 339. We'll just start reading at B. It said, it isn't plain yet whether it's a big one, but it is plain that we must consider whether what you say is true. That must be considered because, while I too agree that the just is something of advantage, right? Now I want you to remember that as we move forward, right? So what we're seeing here is the first time that Socrates is actually positing something. He's saying that justice is to the advantage. Now what that means hasn't been decided yet. And so he's taking something that Thrasymachus says, even though he disagrees with the ultimate conclusion. But he's saying, you're right, justice is to the advantage, but how are we supposed to understand what that means? To the advantage, you add to it and assert that it's the advantage of the stronger, and I don't know whether it's so. Go ahead. That's what I'm going to do. Now tell me, don't you say, though, that it's just to obey the rulers? I do. Are the rulers in their several cities infallible? Or are they such as they make mistakes as well? By all means, they certainly are such as to make mistakes. When they put their hands to setting down laws, do they set some down correctly and some incorrectly? I suppose so. Is that law correct which sets down what's advantage for themselves? And that one incorrect, which sets down what is disadvantage, so to disadvantage themselves? How do you mean it? So in other words, what he's saying is, so you're saying, Thrasymachus, that all of these rulers, they're making all these laws, and if you follow those laws, it's to the advantage of the ruler. As I said, in the ideal version of this, like all the laws I create, when you follow them, you're helping me stay in power. But if I'm a human, do I not make laws that are actually disadvantageous to me? Like, could I not make a law that obviously I think would be to my advantage, but in reality, it would be problematic for me? But if I'm telling everyone that they have to follow every single law that I lay down, could not the possibility arise where I make a law and everybody follows it, and it's actually going to harm me and not be to my advantage? All right, so someone give me like an example of what they think that would look like.
Impeachment.
What? What do you mean by impeachment? Like I made a law that allows for impeachment?
No, well, I mean, I guess you would say it would be the legislative power that kind of helps give that or give that disadvantage to the executive power to take away their essentially their power or their sway.
Right, but notice what he's saying is, I mean, that would be an example of what the ruler shouldn't have done, right? So what he's saying is, if the ruler were thinking straight, they wouldn't have written into the Constitution the option of impeachment. Because it sounds like a good idea. Like, look, I'm not so power hungry that I'm just immune to this. Obviously, if I screw up, I'm going to write in a mechanism where you can remove me. And then down the road, he's like, shit, that shouldn't have been a law. I thought that was going to work out in my favor, kind of disarm people's suspicions, but now they're using it against me and I shouldn't have done that. So if there's any, that's what Socrates said. Could we make laws that are problematic? Yeah.
Like gun laws?
What do you mean by that?
I know like they vary in states and maybe even cities and counties, but like how people have access to guns and then some people might use it for like safety, but some people might use it like to shoot up school or something.
Or a political figure.
Yeah.
Right? So remember what he's saying is the laws are advantageous to the rulers.
Yeah.
So like if I'm a ruler and I made a law that allowed people to have weapons, and then people are like, well, you let us have these weapons and now we're using them to take over, I'm gonna go, shit. And that's what he's getting at. Yeah.
I was gonna just give like another, like more direct example of like if a politician did voter suppression, but it turned out they suppressed the very people that would have voted for them.
Exactly. Right, exactly right.
I was gonna say when the monarchs privatized lands for their own hunting uses.
Yep.
And then it wound up inadvertently affecting them because people rose up against them of hunger.
Exactly. So you can see like the motivation behind it is never going to be, like no ruler, Seneca is saying, no ruler is ever going to make a law on purpose that is to their disadvantage. Ever. It just doesn't make sense under his understanding of what it means to rule, because the ruler rules for themselves. Yeah.
What about like prohibition?
What about prohibition?
Like whenever they
Rest in peace.
like they outlawed alcohol to maintain a more orderly society and keep people calmer and not just breaking shit when they get fucked up.
I mean, that's the actual language that they really.
It was implied. Then like people started like the mobs or whatever, and they rose to power, and they started getting influenced through the illegal moonshining trade and like liquor trade that came to be with like Al Capone and all that.
Yeah.
So then they, like those people actually started gaining political and societal influence and power, and people supported them more than local politicians and police chiefs because at the end of the day, they owned everybody because everybody wanted their alcohol.
Yep.
So then they had to reverse prohibition and start taxing alcohol again because they were losing all the tax money on that, and it was going to the mobs, and they became more powerful than actual political leaders at the time.
Yeah, or today with marijuana still being illegal.
Yeah.
Right? You're just giving the cartels money. Right? And so this is the argument that you're making. Like, you make laws to control people, but there's always unintended consequences to making these laws. And so this is the issue Socrates is pointing out. He's like, I'm agreeing that people make laws that they think are to their advantage, but could they not mess up? Right? Oh, Logan, yeah, sorry.
I was wondering if, like, it's not necessarily passing a law, but more like declaring war in a way, of like Vietnam or like in the Middle East, stuff like that. Like, they thought it was a good idea in the first place, but then it really backfired.
Right. So you make a law saying, or you pass a, act of war saying, like, they didn't actually do that, by the way. It was a police action. It was not an official war. To sort of quell the rise of communism because that posed a threat to society, and then it ends up turning people against you, right? So just exactly things like this. Now, before Thrasymachus responds to Socrates with his very interesting point, right? Because it seems like if I make laws that are actually to my disadvantage that people follow them, that would seem to be a problem for his definition, right? What happens next? Who responds? Did you guys even pick up on this? Polemarchus and Cleitophon. And what are they doing?
Agreeing with Socrates.
So they're providing their own take on the position that Thrasymachus is apparently putting forth. And do they do a good job of it? No. Thrasymachus is like, I never said any of those things. Why would Plato write this quick little exchange in there? Because it's not like they spend time talking about it. Thrasymachus is like, no, that's just wrong. What's the point?
This probably happens all the time.
Yes. So in what way?
People saying wrong things. Or
Yeah.
being dumb.
Exactly. So what do we know about Polemarchus so far? How good is he at this? Not very good. And notice how people, I mean, you probably see this happen a lot, where you might be having this happens a lot with talking politics with people who have never taken a philosophy class, and some that have. They start talking about things, and you're like, well, this person said this, and you're like, that's not what that person said, like, at all. And so what Plato's quickly pointing out is, even if Thrasymachus is saying something that we might not agree with, right? You can notice how when people say these things that are potentially problematic and dangerous ideas, it very quickly attracts people who are going to try to like push those or rephrase those ideas, even if they're arguing against it. They're like, this is what he said. But that's not what he said. And so if we had continued down that line, if Thrasymachus wasn't there, now they're sitting here with a straw man version of what Thrasymachus is saying, and they think that they've actually bested Thrasymachus, and they haven't. And this is why I keep telling everybody, like, when you find yourself talking to someone who holds radically different political views than you owe it to yourself to truly understand where they're coming from and what they're saying and why they're saying it. Because it's only then that when you ran into the person they heard it from, you could actually argue against them, right? We're not doing ourselves any favors by, like, picking apart people who don't really have the full argument together, and they don't spend any time on it, really. Thrasymachus jumps right back in. He points out they got his point wrong. He calls Socrates a sycophant, which is interesting. And then he says, a really interesting, so this is at 340, so this is at 340b here, down C, D, and E. He asks the question that ends up becoming an example that's used a lot throughout the Republic, and he brings up doctors. And he says, okay, so what I mean when I say that rulers make laws that are to their advantage is, what is it that makes somebody a doctor? What are doctors doing when we say that person is doctoring? Healing somebody, right? When someone dies on the person's table, right? In that moment, are we saying that in that moment they were being a doctor?
Maybe.
There it
For
is.
Thrasymachus, no.
No. He's like, if it's the case that what makes a doctor is that they heal people, if that doctor fails to heal people, how is that person a doctor?
Well, euthanasia.
That's a whole other debate.
Yeah.
But
Is he saying that like you define someone's like a doctor based on their ability, their performance, rather than their education?
yeah, so it has nothing to do with whether or not we call someone a doctor based upon a degree they hold or a position that they hold. What he's saying is, if we really, really think about this in terms of definition, like what is it that makes a doctor, or what is it that makes a lawyer, right? So what makes a doctor is that they heal people. If somebody had a medical degree, but literally every single person that they met with got sicker or died, I know.
You phony.
Like, would we really say that that person is a doctor? Is it the degree they have that makes them a doctor, or is it what they do that makes them a doctor? And that's going to be the question that Thrasymachus actually latches onto, right? Because even if we're going to argue, like, well, part of being a doctor is like some people might die. And he's like, yes, but if someone is a good doctor, what makes them a good doctor is that the people don't die, they actually heal people. And so if we're talking about what makes a ruler, sure, Socrates, fine. Some people could make laws that they think are to their advantage as a ruler, but they're not. But I would argue in those moments when they make those laws, they're actually not acting as a ruler, because that's not what makes you a ruler. What makes you a ruler is that you make laws that are to your advantage. If you act otherwise, in those moments, you're not acting as a ruler. It's not what rulers are. Just like if a doctor accidentally kills someone, we don't say, that was some good doctoring right there. in that moment, they weren't being a doctor, because that is not what doctors do. What do you guys think?
I think he's moving the goalpost.
I get what you mean.
Yeah.
I don't know if I agree.
Yeah, he's-
What do you mean
well,
he's
that's
moving?
not-
What do you mean he's moving the goalpost? That's
So
what
Socrates says, or I don't know who brought it up, who said doctor first,
Thrasymachus.
but immediately right after that, it's like, well, that's not a real doctor.
But why? But that's what But I just want to be careful, because that's what argument is, right? Is if we're trying to get to the pure definition of something, then we would bring up examples to clarify precisely what I mean, and that's the point that's going on here. We have Polemarchus and Cleitophon, and they're presenting a side of an argument that Thrasymachus is like, look, that is not what I meant. Let me give you an example to explain to you exactly what I mean, because it's not like Thrasymachus said anything other than, all he said is, it's to the advantage of the stronger. Someone else said, oh, then what about this? He's like, you obviously didn't understand what I meant in the first place when I said ruler, because this is what I mean. And now, if he changes now it's a different problem. So now he's posited, like, this is what I mean. He's actually made a claim, and now Socrates can attack that. Genevieve, yeah.
I honestly, I feel like it's a pretty strong argument, especially with his elaboration further on about a craftsman, a wise man. Like, I think the wise man also helps, like, this idea of when someone's acting, like, if they're considered a wise person and they say something unwise, you can't say they're a wise person in that moment.
Right.
So the same thing with the ruler. So I think the doctor, like, you get hung up on, like, the specificity of the role, but in reality, it's like, when you're talking about a doctor, if they try to heal the sick and they do not heal the sick, if the doctor is to heal the sick, they're not a doctor in that moment. So they might be a doctor by title,
Yes.
but in the way they're acting, they're not acting as a doctor, just like a wise man who says something unwise isn't acting as a wise man.
Exactly. So it's a really good way of putting it, because we can imagine a situation where, like, just because someone has the title of doctor does not mean they're a doctor. And Thrasymachus is now able to say, like, look, just because someone is, like, the ruler of this particular city-state doesn't mean that they actually are a ruler.
If you've got a paper due at midnight and your computer won't turn on, are you gonna sit there arguing with someone about whether it's a computer, or are you gonna go find someone to type your paper on?
You're not being a student in that moment.
Wait, what? So you're saying if my computer breaks, are we going to sit here and argue as to whether or not in that moment it's a computer?
Or like, yeah.
Okay, I think you could. I think it might be a waste of time given the circumstances.
Right.
But yet in the moment, if my car doesn't run,
It's not.
not really a car. It's just a hunk of metal that would help in the rain, maybe. But
It's more similar to a bicycle.
No, I still think it's a car.
it's not. Cars have to do what they do. So,
That car's not to your advantage.
no, like if you had a firearm that every time you pulled the trigger, it only shot out flowers. I feel like that's not what firearms do. I know it's adorable. I was trying to think of, like, what would I do where everyone goes, no matter what your disposition, like, everyone goes, what were we even fighting over?
It's like the little,
That's amazing.
this little stick that comes out and then the paper says.
Oh yeah, it's bang on it, yeah. It's like, huh?
I mean, is the point of a firearm to be lethal or to solve a conflict? To be a violence?
Those are the same thing.
I think we're getting into the weeds here. Okay, so the idea is this, though. He's now posited a definition as to what a ruler is. And so if we move on a little bit here, so let's get that final thing at 341b. Nor would I even try, you blessed man, this is Socrates again. But so that the same sort of thing doesn't happen to us again, make it clear whether you meant by the ruler and stronger the man who is such only in common parlance, or the man who is such in the precise speech, whose advantage, you said a moment ago, it will be just for the weaker to serve because he is stronger. And he commits, he says, the ruler in the most precise sense, do harm to that and play the sycophant if you can. I ask for no favors, but you won't be able to do so. They go through like what he means by this, and then Socrates fights back. So this is at 341c. He said, enough of this, right? Now tell me, is the doctor in the precise sense of whom you recently spoke, a moneymaker or one who cares for the sick? Speak about the man who is really a doctor. One who cares for the sick, he said. And what about the pilot? Is the man who is a pilot, in the correct sense, a ruler of sailors or a sailor? He's a ruler of sailors. I suppose it needn't be taken into account that he sails in the ship, and he shouldn't be called a sailor for that, For it isn't because of sailing that he is called a pilot, but because of his art and his rule over the sailors. Art here, think of it more like a skill, right? So not like literal art. True. Is there something advantageous for each of them? Certainly. And it isn't the art, I said, naturally directed towards seeking and providing for the advantage of each. Yes, that is what it is directed toward. And is there then any advantage for each of the arts other than to be as perfect as possible? How do you mean this question? So he goes into this idea, he's basically asking over these next few paragraphs, like, when we're talking about what something is, we need to be very precise as to what the object is, what the goal is of that thing. And so, since, notice, Thrasymachus opens the door here. Thrasymachus brings up doctors. And he's like, look, let me use this example of a doctor. So this is what I mean to the point there. He's like, I am going to use doctor as an example to show to me my ruler. If a doctor kills somebody in that moment, they're not being a doctor. So now Socrates is like, cool, let's talk about doctors and what makes somebody a doctor. When someone is being a doctor in the precise sense that you're talking about, Thrasymachus, not just this general idea, when they're being a doctor, is their effort as a doctor for their own gain or for the gain of others? Others. A doctor, as a doctor, is someone who looks out for and improves the health of their patients. That's what makes them a doctor. Now, a lawyer, this is a tougher one, I know.
It depends.
But what is it as a lawyer? What makes a lawyer a lawyer?
Protecting your client.
Say it again.
Protecting your client.
Protecting your client, and that might mean the client is the state,
Yeah.
right? But either way, you are looking out to promote justice for others. That's the whole point. That's what makes you a lawyer. It's not about yourself, right? The captain of a ship, what makes them a captain is that they are looking out for the well-being of all of their sailors. It's not the other way around. The sailors aren't there to give them the advantage of being a captain. It's reversed. It's precisely, I'm acting as a captain when I am looking out for the benefit and advantage of others. Just like I am acting as a doctor when I'm looking out for the health of others. What do you guys think of this? This is Socrates' counter. Any thoughts? Because I know lawyers make it difficult. Because I bet you if you were to ask a bunch of people in law school why they want to be a lawyer, anyone past first year law probably isn't in it for the law.
I mean, to be fair, they do address that in like the next.
They do?
section.
Yep. So what do they say?
It's like everyone makes money, but they also do their art.
Right. Meaning what? So what's the position here?
To where he's like, people practice their art and they help others, but they do so not only for the benefit of others, but also for the benefit of themselves, because they are also wage makers. Like a craftsman is someone who like makes chairs, but he also makes money at the same time. He's in it for both in a sense.
Right. So notice how he's separating out the wages that one earns, right? So if someone's like, I am going to be a lawyer because I'm going to get paid, right? I'm doing it for the money. Is that person a lawyer or are they a moneymaker?
I think they're both the same thing.
So if they are only doing it for the money,
Yeah.
are we really going to say that that person is a lawyer?
If they're doing lawyer things, yeah.
What if you work on Wall Street?
Hmm?
What if you work on Wall Street? Are you
Then
a
you are
moneymaker or
literally a
moneymaker?
moneymaker.
You're a vampire.
And if you are working on Wall Street in the way that you ought be, I know this is going to sound very silly, in its purest, most ideal version, what is the goal of somebody who works on Wall Street as a stockbroker? What is supposed to be their role?
Because you make money for investors.
You make money for other people,
Yeah.
right? You make money for investors. And this is exactly Socrates' point, right? It seems like those that are on Wall Street to make money for themselves have lost the plot as to what it is that they're supposed to be doing, right? And you can imagine a doctor who is in it purely for the money, who then starts taking kickbacks and starts taking orders on what drugs to prescribe and taking, et cetera, et cetera. And when we find ourselves becoming corrupted by our own greed and avarice, we very quickly find ourselves no longer performing the art or the craft that we set out to do, right? We allowed ourselves to become wage earners, money makers, as opposed to doctors and lawyers, and I really hesitate, stockbrokers, right? So this is his argument, basically. Now, Thrasymachus fights back. At 342, he brings up, well, this is where he says he's sniveling, right? So think 342, or 343a, sorry. When we came to this point in the argument, and it was evident to everyone that the argument about the just had turned around in the opposite direction, because again, the argument now is the justice is to the advantage. If I'm acting as a ruler, then justice is to the advantage of those that are ruled over. Thrasymachus, instead of answering, said, "Tell me, Socrates, do you have a wet nurse?" "Why this?" I said. Shouldn't you answer instead of asking such things? "Because," he said, "you know she neglects your sniveling nose and doesn't give it the wiping you need, since it's her fault you do not even recognize sheep or shepherd." Bit of an insult. But what a particular. And then he goes on to say the following. So I'm just going to read through this whole thing. "Because you suppose that shepherds or cowherds consider the good of the sheep or the cows and fatten them and take care of them, looking to something other than their master's good and their own. And so you also believe that the rulers in these cities, those who truly rule, think about the ruled differently from the way a man would regard sheep. And that night and day they consider anything else than how they will benefit themselves. And you are so far off about the just and justice and the unjust and injustice that you are unaware that justice and the just are really someone else's good, the advantage of the man who is stronger and rules, and a personal harm, this is important, to the man who obeys and serves. Injustice is the opposite, and it rules the truly simple and just. And those who are ruled do what is advantageous for him who is stronger, and they make him whom they serve happy, but themselves not at all. And this must be considered most simple, Socrates. The just man everywhere has less than the unjust man. First, in contracts, when the just man is a partner of the unjust man, you will always find that at the dissolution of the partnership, the just man does not have more than the unjust man, but less. Second, in matters pertaining to the city, when there are taxes, the just man pays more on the basis of equal property, the unjust man less. And when there are distributions, the one makes no profit, the other much. And further, when each holds some ruling office, even if the just man suffers no other penalty, it is his lot to see his domestic affairs deteriorate from neglect, while he gets no advantage from the public store, thanks to his being just. In addition to this, he incurs the ill will of his relatives and his acquaintances when he is unwilling to serve them against what is just. The unjust man's situation is the opposite in all these respects. I am speaking of the man I just now spoke of, the one who is able to get the better in a big way. Consider him if you want to judge how much more to his private advantage the unjust is than the just. You will learn most easily of all if you turn to the most perfect injustice, which makes the one who does injustice most happy, and those who suffer it and would not be willing to do injustice the most wretched." What's he saying?
If you're just, you get screwed.
Yep.
Nice guys always finish last.
Nice guys always finish last. You're sitting here saying how justice is to the advantage of someone other than the ruler. Name me a single situation where being a just person advantaged you more than being a properly unjust person. Yeah.
Nobel Peace Prize winner.
You could have lied about it.
Yeah.
There's some.
I thought I had it there.
Because, no, the point with that,
They give it to like defense contractors as well?
They have.
Yeah, they don't give it to the best people.
Not always, not typically. But I mean, in other words, if I'm a just person, I could win a Nobel Peace Prize. But is me being an unjust person preventing me from winning an unjust Peace Prize? It would be in that circumstances. But like, what he's saying is, between the two, now let's say there's two candidates going up for the Nobel Peace Prize, right? one is just and one's unjust. If I'm an unjust person, and I'm up for this award, what am I gonna do? Sabotage, cheat, spread lies, manipulate, win. Just person's like, I'm above all that, and they're like, cool, I'm taking the award. Good luck with that. Yeah.
That gets into like book 2, that like, that's really just about the seeming just than like being actually just.
Well, yes. So in book 2, you're going to see the question is asked: what benefit does being just get you that appearing just doesn't? Right. So if I can appear, like if you're going to say something like, well, being just, like if I'm a just person, people might trust me, right? They'll want to work with me. I can develop business relationships because they know I'm a just person. Couldn't I do all of those things if everyone just thinks I'm just?
Sure.
And on top of that, I get all the other benefits of being unjust too. So like the big winner is somebody that everyone just thinks is a just person, get all those benefits. Meanwhile, I'm just stealing and committing crimes left and right, but no one knows, and so I get all those benefits too. Seems like bigger win. I get all the money, all the power, all the respect and fame and glory, and you get to, I don't know, feel good about yourself. But at the end of the day, you're losing. And notice this. Let's say you're a just person and you had some cause that you really, really cared about. Well, what if you could achieve that cause, but you could only do it through unjust means? The unjust person has no problem of conscience. They're like, not a problem. Lie, cheat, steal, I get what I want and I win. Just person's like, damn it, I wish I could cheat and lie and steal because this one actually mattered. Where's the disadvantage, is what Thrasymachus is asking. And also, do you think Thrasymachus is right? If you don't, if you're like, no, you should be just, fine. What you're going to have to do, and is literally the question. This is the question that guides the entire Republic. It is, how are we going to rightly argue that being just is actually better than being unjust when it's plain as day that when we look into society, again, Thrasymachus, it sounds like he's saying, and therefore you should all be unjust. He's not actually saying that. He's simply saying, if we look into society, it seems like the unjust people win. How is he wrong? And if he's not wrong, what is the value of being just? Yeah.
It may be a bit of like a weird exclusion if it is right, but we're going by the same argument that justice is to the advantage of the stronger. Have you ever seen like the Saw movies?
No.
Yes.
Okay, so if
I saw the first one the year it
so
came out.
Jigsaw is
Awesome.
the more powerful, and you're following him to his advantage, whatever that is.
Following his
But you're-
rules.
Right, but you're doing a bad thing in a way, but you're doing it to survive.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Is that would be a case where you want to be just rather than unjust? Because then would the unjust person not follow Jigsaw, or would they still do it?
So you're look at it from Thrasymachus' point of view, right? So we're going to imagine in this scenario, Jigsaw is the ruler.
Right.
He's making the rules.
Yes.
And then when you follow those rules, is that to Jigsaw's advantage? Is he getting what he wants?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you don't follow his rules, how does that work out for
But
you?
you're asking like, when is it better to be just than unjust?
Right. So in this scenario,
Yes.
which is pretty extreme.
Yes. So if you're under Jigsaw, if you're in one of his puzzles or whatever.
Yeah.
Is it better to be just or unjust?
Well, what would a just action under the Jigsaw rules
To
be?
follow his rules, right?
Right.
So if you're unjust and you're not, you get.
Wait, but look at what happens. Look at it from Jigsaw's. I love that we're doing this.
You went
From Jigsaw's point of view, he is helping you,
Yes.
right? So he's like, look, I'm making the laws and the rules. If you follow my rules, first of all, I'm still where I am, and I get what I want, and I get acolytes, which is good for me.
Right.
And I'm actually helping you too, because if you make it out, look at how much more you appreciate life.
Okay.
And if you don't follow my rules, grotesque death.
Right.
Right.
So isn't it better to be just if, in that scenario?
Well, you're not the stronger
Well, yeah.
in that scenario.
Well, no, he's right. What the cynic is saying is, for you, as the person with the thing on your head,
Right.
yes, it is better for you to follow the rules,
Okay.
and it's also beneficial for the rule because he made those rules.
Okay.
So, to go back to the shepherd sheep, because he kind of skips over that.
Yeah.
What he's getting at is like, look, Socrates, you're saying that like the reason that the ruler is, the ruler, it's like you're saying they should only care, they do what they do because they care about the well-being of the people.
Right.
Like they gain nothing from this. He's like, why does a shepherd care about sheep? Is he really in it for the sheep? That's a weird shepherd. Like that guy should be watched. Right? If they're like, do you get paid for this? No, not in money. It's like, oh boy. No, the shepherd is deeply concerned with the well-being of the sheep, but not because of the sheep.
Right.
It's because of what the sheep can provide to him. So the main primary focus of ruling, of course I have to like look out for the sheep, but I'm only doing it because the sheep provide me with everything that I want. I want them to succeed because it allows me to, right? It's all about me, and if I'm doing my job right as a ruler, so Thrasymachus isn't like saying like we should be tyrants.
Right.
He's simply saying like, if you're a good ruler, you're doing it for yourself, and the best way to get what you want is to make sure that the people that you're ruling over, A, don't have rebellions and uprisings, because that's bad, and B, are healthy enough within society to supply you with all the things that you want. Right? So if I'm doing my job right, I'm going to run a society where everyone's basically happy. That provides me with income tax money and a military to protect me, and everyone's so. But if I'm running a city badly, like Socrates points out, and I'm making all these laws that make people hate me, and like everything dies of disease, like I'm not being a good ruler because I'm not helping myself. Like being a ruler of a dying country is not fun, but being a ruler of a thriving country, that's awesome because I get everything I want. So I care about the well-being of my citizens insofar as they can supply me with everything that I want. As opposed to what Socrates is saying is, I care about the citizens first and foremost. And in fact, Socrates is going to go on to say, like, true rulers don't want the job. Because they'd rather be doing something else. But they recognize that it's their duty to take over because they're, like, the best in the position. So, to your example, to wrap it up, it's perfect. Following the rules within the system of Jigsaw, from Jigsaw's perspective, it's the right thing to do because you are going to be better off as a human, and then you're going to be an acolyte, and then you're going to help me do the things that I want to do. And they do. You guys have seen the movies. They all help him. Right? Kind of makes you wonder what you would do. God, that'd be horrifying. How does he have the time to make those things?
Independently wealthy.
Oh, yeah.
Also, like, he has cancer too.
Like, yeah.
The point of the movies is that he's like on the verge of death.
I just saw the last one where they brought him back.
Yeah.
They made him like a good person.
The last one is like a prequel.
Yeah, it's like a prequel, but he's 25 years older.
Doesn't he have like underlings?
Yeah, but he's in it. But he's in it, the last one.
Four apprentices, if I remember.
I love that we're so detailed on this. This is awesome. What do you guys study? Jigsaw. But you see what I'm saying, though?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Did you have something? Yeah.
I don't know if this is Plato's direct response to what he's saying, but I thought it was, I don't know if it works. He talks about, this is 346D.
346.
He talks about how like all craftsmen work for wages still.
Yep.
Because their craft is for somebody else, they still require some benefit for themselves, but the craft in itself is not for themselves. So because rulers still work for a wage, their craft is still for others.
Yes.
But I don't know if that works, especially when we live in a contemporary scenario where like the rulers set their wages, so then like they can decide what is beneficial for them in that context still.
Yeah.
And then that position is what allows them to do that.
Right. I mean, it is a really bizarre situation where you are the governing body that decides how much the governing body gets paid. Right. That's why I always love when politicians are fighting for living wages and they're making $175,000. You're like, you could not do that. But that's the point. For Plato, he would agree with you.
But saying that you're misusing, so that you're not really a ruler in that scenario?
Yeah, you've lost sight of the problem. And Plato actually recognizes this, so we'll get there. But later on, in the Republic, when he describes what the ruling class, there's rules to the ruling class. So the rules of the ruling class is A, the rulers can't make any money. And the rulers can't own any private property at all. So why not?
Because they make decisions about those things.
Exactly. So rulers cannot own private property. Rulers cannot even handle money. They live a very Spartan existence. A Spartan existence would be like you get 3 regular meals a day. You're taken care of by the state. You communally bunk with people. You do not have lavish or any luxury items whatsoever. Your entire existence is basically there to be there for the good of the people and to make sure that the laws that are written are there to benefit everybody in the best way possible. And given that we are giving you power, we cannot couple that with money because A, you can manipulate the system to give yourself more money, and B, we don't want to corrupt you. And so if you're a ruler and you make the rules, how do you corrupt the system? You make rules that give you more. Well, you can't get any. Right? Your needs are taken care of and you do the thing that you're supposed to do. We eliminate the problem.
What about your family?
Oh, we'll get to
They
that.
don't have to.
We will get to that. The whole family unit as we understand it, mother, father, sons, daughters, that is fucking gone. Causes way too many problems. No more family units. Yep. Plato is like, nope, that's not good. It just breeds discontent.
You're
So Plato's on board. Plato gets this bizarre rap. I've always noticed that people think that he's saying one thing and then they've never actually read the Republic. Like, for instance, Plato believes in a minimum wage and a maximum wage. The reason being, we don't want people to accumulate so much wealth that we end up having classes between the rich and the poor, the haves and the have-nots. It creates stasis within society and strife, which leads to civil war, and just avoid all that. So maximum wage, minimum wage, we don't have a problem anymore. That's in the Republic. I know. So everyone's sitting there going, Plato's a fascist. You never read the Republic. Now, he does do some fascist shit, don't get me wrong. Eugenics is really hard to argue around. But we'll talk about it. Cool. Yeah, all great stuff. Any other thoughts on this?
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
So, how is this bad?
How's what bad?
So if justice is to the advantage of the stronger, but it's also to the advantage of the weaker, that seems like a mutually symbiotic relationship.
So if it's done properly, sure, but if I'm only ruling to my own advantage, what Socrates is basically going to say is that you are creating a system of competition that if you are not bound by the standards of justice, you are willing to lie, cheat, steal, manipulate, hurt people if it means that you get to maintain your position. So in other words, if we're talking about the shepherd and sheep, it's like, well, I've got too many sheep, it's cutting my profits. So I'll just kill 8 of them, and then that way my books are balanced and I'm good to go. But what about those 8? Like if I'm the shepherd, I only care about myself and what the sheep can give me, then cutting 8 down is the right thing to do for me.
Well, isn't that the point of sheep?
Why do you think he picks sheep as the metaphor?
Because
They're people.
designed to.
Well, we often call people who just simply follow the ruler sheep. He's a sheeple. He's using this specifically as a metaphor because obviously Thrasymachus is like, the first thing Thrasymachus says, who's already a snarky guy, he's like, yeah, because the shepherd really cares about the sheep. Right? Obviously he's saying the ruler really cares about the people. No, he cares about what the people can give to him. And if people are in the way, or there's some people voicing their opinions that are problematic to me, what can I do to them? Cut them down. So it opens up the door and it allows for this kind of behavior. And Thrasymachus, under his definition, that's fine. And obviously, if we care about justice, we're like, well, I don't know. Now, if he goes too far, because look at our society, right? Censorship. Where are we on that?
Who's we?
We, as a group, in this room. Censorship, good or bad? Or does it depend on who's talking?
I don't like it.
Now, I would imagine if a politician said, like let's say there's something or some idea that you really don't want people saying or talking about, and the politician that was in power said, fuck those people, and stops them from talking, and you're like, yeah! But then, that same politician starts cutting down or silencing people that you want to have talk. Would you have a different reaction then? Probably, right? Now, if we're going to talk about things in terms of justice, what Plato is getting at, what Socrates is getting at, is we have to, as best as we can, if we're trying to approach the idea of justice in purely objective terms, we have to. Part of the work is recognizing our own biases, right? We don't see our biases as problems, we see them as truth. But so does everybody else. And so if we allow something in society like censorship's okay if it's on this side, you have just opened the door to censorship of any kind if what you start saying starts to threaten the powers that be, and it happens all the time. Who is banning books now? Who was banning books 30 years ago? It shifts, it changes. So when you start saying things like, and this is what Plato's getting at, start saying things like, we should, and he talks about censorship a lot, right? And he might be doing it ironically to sort of show us the flaws of our thinking. But if we're going to say that this should be a law so long as it benefits me, be very wary of that because it could swing the other way, right? And so we need to rid ourselves of our biases, of our prejudices, because they could come back to bite us. So if we say something like, well, yeah, it's fine for everybody because if the ruler's looking out for themselves and I benefit from it, then what's the problem? As you say, and that's a good question, but it's not a problem until it's a problem, right? So if the ruler is only out for themselves, it just allows for a whole lot of behavior that's then justified within the system because after all, they are the ruler. Yeah.
This is different because you talk about.
I want everyone to start as like, this is different.
You talk about Thrasymachus being snarky. I feel like Socrates, he's like best of men.
Yeah, no, Socrates is so snarky, like all the time. Like there are times you read Socrates where he will say things to people, and you're like, that's the most condescending thing I've ever heard in my whole life. Like he's not. And you can imagine, and Plato knows this, right? So he's writing him in like this on purpose. It's not like Plato is not aware when he presents Socrates in this light that like it's supposed to come off well. Like he's trying to present, and this is, I get to my point. Plato himself is trying to expose, to rid himself or extricate his own biases out of these equations. So he has to present Socrates as well-rounded or as fully as he can if he wants to avoid being a hypocrite, right? Are there things that Plato is saying that can be criticized? Absolutely. And he writes those criticisms into his own works. And so that's why I really think it's important to really read this stuff and ask yourself, why is he going through this argument? Because maybe he's trying to, really test his own argument, or at least show you that he tried to, right? And leaving it open for us to make those criticisms as well. He wants us to criticize. He wants us to go in there and interpret and find the problems. Because we didn't even get to, the tough stuff yet, where, when he starts talking about banning all poetry, that's extreme. All of it, gone. No art at all. And he gives reasons. I'm not going to get too far ahead. But when we get to those sections, it's very easy to just say, that's crazy, fascist. And yeah, especially since he's writing in an artistic form, so it seems slightly hypocritical. But then the question is, why? So if we're going to say that art is good, Socrates gives us an argument as to why it's bad. Our task then, if we want to keep art, is to defend it in answer to this, and not just dismiss it out of hand because it offends our modern sensibilities. Make sense, everybody? Cool. Last thing I want to talk about, speaking of which, jump ahead to 349D. It's towards the end here. And then I want to talk about this too. Okay. So he's talking about justice, of course. So he says, actually this would be 350, sorry, just go. It's on the same page. Then in the things in which he is prudent, he is also good. In those which he is not, he's thoughtless, yes. And what about the medical man? Is it not the same with him? It's the same. Then, you best of men, to your point, Isaac, is any musical man who is tuning a lyre, in your opinion, willing to get the better of another musical man in tightening and relaxing the strings, or does he claim he deserves more? Not in my opinion, but the better of the unmusical man, necessarily. And what about the medical man? On questions of food and drink, would he want to get the better of a medical man or a medical action? Surely not, but the better of what is not medical, yes. Now, for every kind of knowledge and lack of knowledge, see if, in your opinion, any man at all who knows chooses voluntarily to say or do more than another man who knows, and not the same as the man who is like himself in action. So basically what he's getting at is this. If we're talking about, like, a true doctor and what that doctor is doing, like, if I'm an actual doctor and I'm working with other doctors, and my goal as a doctor is to promote health and the advancement of medicine, as a doctor, am I on purpose, like, sabotaging data, manipulating things, tearing someone down just so I can get the glory? Or do I work with others, make sure that their theories are as strong as they can be to promote the actual goal, which is health? In music, any musicians here? Okay. So if I'm playing music with multiple people, and I'm on stage with a lot, and I've actually played with people who are like this, and it's the worst. When people play music so they can play their solo. I played in a band with a guy, his name is Brian Lindsay. He spoke in the third person. It was awesome, because when we kicked him out, on the phone, he was really drunk, and he was like, well, if you don't want to play with Brian Lindsay, then Brian Lindsay doesn't want to play with you. And I was like, I really don't want to play with Brian Lindsay. He was also he was a surgeon, and I didn't know that until like a year in the band with him, when he got a phone call, and he said he worked at a hospital. I thought he was a janitor. He was honestly the best slide guitar player I've ever seen in my whole life. Like, he was literally amazing. But he picked the phone, he's like, no, I can't make it, sorry, blah, 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 blah. Hangs up. He's like, sorry guys, I'm on call. And in my head, I'm like, what kind of janitor's on call? Like, what? And he goes, no, I'm a surgeon. And I was like, why would you not tell us that? And also, was that important? Because I feel like you should go. And he's like, they'll figure it out. I don't like telling people because it like takes away some cred. And I was like, no offense to your logic, but like, I feel like you have way more cred because you're like a surgeon who's also that good at guitar. That's just, he ended up quitting medicine to become a studio musician in Nashville. Yeah. But that guy, he never played to the song. He just played guitar wankery constantly. And it sounded good, but it didn't, he was always trying to like outdo everyone else, and it ended up making him look worse. Versus somebody who plays to the song, right? If I'm truly interested in making the music sound as good as the music can sound, then I am going to do my best to make every other musician I'm playing with play better. Because they will only elevate me as well, as opposed to using them as a platform for me. And if I have that mentality, I'm never ever going to be able to actually achieve the things I could achieve, because I'm not pushing those to elevate. And if I'm part of that, I will elevate too. But also, he starts hinting at something here when he talks about medicine and music and knowledge as opposed to power and money. To your point, if my whole objective as a ruler is to acquire power and money for me, it's all about what I want. There's only so much power and money to go around, right? The more power and money that I accumulate, the less there is for everyone else. And if everybody else is acting in dastardly ways of cheating, lying, manipulating, stealing, am I really happy? Because aren't I constantly on guard to make sure that this other person doesn't come in, sneak in, steal my stuff, right? I can't ever trust anyone, so I end up losing the ability to work together. And so this competition that is bred from this kind of thinking about ruling is actually, Socrates' argument, is to a detriment to the ruler. Whereas if we stop focusing on the acquisition of power and money, but we instead focus on ruling in such a way as to generate knowledge or harmony between the people, well, knowledge is not a zero-sum good. What that means is, if I give you knowledge, I still have it, right? You then can give it to other people, and it just spreads and grows. Same with health, the more healthy a society is, the easier it is for everyone in that society to remain healthy, right? So Socrates is saying, like, we need to focus on the kinds of goods, like music. If I'm in tune, it doesn't stop you from being in tune. And if I'm actually a musician who cares about music, I'm not going to sabotage your instrument on stage so that you play terribly, because then I'll sound bad, and the music will sound bad. If I'm going to be a true musician who cares about music, I'm going to make sure that you play in tune, even if you aren't quite sure how to get there yet. Because I care about the music, and because I care about the music, I care about you doing better, basically. We focus our attention on different goods, not power, not money, not winning, not besting somebody else, not looking better, not glory, and not honor, in the sense that we would think, for the Greeks, when I say that, honor is something you're given. It's not something internal, right? So it's like you were honored because you won a battle. It's an external good that people really cared a lot about. And Socrates is like, that distracts us from like living rightly. Because we're so concerned about the opinions of other people that we find ourselves being distracted from what we ought to be doing, right? So focusing our attention on the right kinds of goods will actually generate a better life for everybody, is what he's basically arguing. And then he points this last thing out here on 352C. He's like, look, even when we're talking about unjust people, could you not argue, and do you not agree, that when those unjust people have like accomplished something together, they actually had to use justice to do it between themselves, like honor amongst thieves, basically? It's like, look, I agree to not steal from you while we go steal from this other guy. Well, it's like, well, you had to use a sense of justice in the accomplishment of the tasks you want to accomplish, even if you're doing unjust things. So instead of focusing on like the goal that you're trying to achieve, like the theft, focus on like, how did we achieve this? Was it by stealing from each other and lying? Or did we have to like actually work together in harmony to accomplish even this bad thing? And if we recognize that, we're like, oh, this is where things can happen. And then because once you steal a thing, now it's going to happen. If you're not truly just, you're going to fight over it, bicker, competition, power, money, limited amount. Yeah.
Ambrose Bierce wrote this thing, The Devil's Dictionary, which is like a big like political commentary on like a lot of different terms. But one of them was alliance, a noun, and it's like two thieves who have their hands so firmly in each other's pockets that they have to work together to pick a third. Just reminded me of that.
That's exactly it, right? So he's obviously not saying we should be pickpockets. But if you're going to be a successful pickpocket, don't pickpockets, look out for each other. Right? So that's the thing we should be focusing on, is the camaraderie. Right? It was a hands, yeah.
So, would you say that would be the reason why you should be just? Or is that a reason Plato's giving of why you should be just too? Because I know you gave a kind of a smirky like, oh yeah, you're just, good for you. So stuff shit that you're kind of dealing with, like robbery, a little scam, wire fraud, whatever. But
well, he's not saying that they're just. He's saying that these people are committing unjust actions, right? But what he's asking us to focus on is even the people who are unjust. If Thrasymachus is right, then it's a very lonely road, right? Because power and money are zero-sum goods, and so the goal will be to accumulate as much as I can for myself. At the end of the day, even partnerships amongst unjust people are going to collapse because they're focused on the wrong agenda. But look at everything they accomplished when they worked together, right? When they took a time out from stealing from each other, they were actually able to achieve something. It wasn't that they were stealing that we're praising. It's like, you, the unjust person, I have to convince you that working together is beneficial. So if I can point out moments when you worked together with somebody and was beneficial, yeah, you had the wrong goal, but let's focus on that. And now what if we always did that? And we didn't then throw ourselves into competition for who gets what and where and how we're going to do it. We can build, right? So Socrates is trying to get us to realize that the things that we thought were true aren't. And if I can expose that to you or sort of breathe that idea in your mind through pointing things out that you've experienced yourself, it makes you think about things differently, right? Like, wouldn't it be better if like the second you stole you gotta imagine, every time you watch a heist movie, someone always leaves first with the goods, right? If I were a thief, I'd be like, I'm going with you. Like, I don't trust you, right? Yeah, look at Ocean's 11. Look at all the good they did.
Did they all walk out? They were the police. And then they all walked out together.
Yeah, they all walked out together. Friends to the end.
Isn't it in Now You See Me?
Yeah, same idea, right? Now that's also because they're like pitching theft is somehow good. Plato's not gonna be okay with that, right? What Plato's goal is we wanna construct a society so that we do not need to rob from the rich. That's his goal. Like, there won't be such inequality that people will feel the need to rob because everybody will be supplied for and taken care of. That's the goal in Plato's society. We'll eliminate all the crime because we're gonna educate people and we're gonna eradicate from our society all the things that leads to this kind of strife. That's his goal. Now the question we have to ask as we move forward is it worth it? Because freedom, yeah.
That's what I was gonna say, is that I can see how this builds into like what he believes an ideal society is, because if people are just to the people that they're part of the same faction is, that if everyone in a society becomes under a unified identity in the same faction of that society, then they'll act justly to everyone else in that society.
Exactly.
But then it requires everyone else to assimilate.
Yep, and we can start seeing now immediately why art is bad. Because what are we doing when we're artistic? We're expressing our opinions and our emotions and our points of view. What's that? You don't want that. We already give you the point of view. So we'll get there. But that's what's going on. So when you're reading this, read it with an open mind. Some pretty extreme ideas for the ancient world.
I actually had an idea, I don't know if you filled out the philosophy.
I didn't.
But you kind of already talked about it, like, the use of language in philosophy, whether or not it should be plain or that it being complicated is sometimes a necessity in the field. I thought that'd be really interesting.
That's a really good
about that
topic.
all the time.
That's a really good topic. Good.
Because there